So we're in this season of mirrors. And as John mentioned, we're talking about that mirror that shows the blind curve in the road today. But next week we will finish talking about mirrors, and we'll talk about the mirror in the minister's office, which is that mirror right over there. And maybe if it were still in the minister's office, I would have taken the moment to self-reflect and see that I wasn't wearing a stole this morning. Or maybe if Henry hadn't been stung by a bee in our parking lot 5 minutes before the service started, I would have had the presence of mind to notice. The speed at which we live our lives has grown faster and faster as a species, right? I loved growing up, we would celebrate the changing of the seasons, and I still love the changing of the seasons. I realized that this change, that my favorite season is the changing of the seasons. What we would do in my family growing up is that we had a coffee table in the living room, just our plain, ordinary, rectangular coffee table, the one that I smashed my teeth into as a toddler, and that I was mad at my mom for selling without my permission as a teenager. And we'd take our plain, ordinary coffee table in the living room and we would transform it into an altar. We'd bring the altar cloths out and set each side of the table with elements of the direction that it faced, feathers and other elements invoking air for east, the far-seeing, in the south, fire, the heat and passion of the south, in the west, shells for water, the changing moods of the west, and in the north, stones, other representatives of earth, the solidity of north. And we'd have ourselves a little neo-pagan ritual around the coffee table of altar. And what we would do, it didn't really matter which season changing we were celebrating, whether it was a solstice or an equinox. And a friend of mine who regularly leads neo-pagan rituals, earth-based rituals for adults these days, he's lamented, what am I going to do for this next ritual? It's the same thing I'm always going to do. I'm going to let go of the past and set intentions for the future. Burn something that was been and that I want to let go of, and call in what I'm hoping will come next. And indeed, is there anything else to do in these rituals of turning? I think what I learned as a kid growing up doing these rituals regularly was to hold a more spacious understanding of the present moment. To understand that the present moment includes that which has come, that which is receding now, as well as that which is coming in. That all of that is part of the present moment. I've heard this named the 200-year present, going beyond the season going out and the season coming in, but to imagine the present moment as spanning from the time the oldest person that you know was born until the time that the youngest person that you know will die. That's the present moment. There's a foundation here in San Francisco, you might have heard about the Long Now Foundation, that its whole purpose, it was co-founded by Stuart Brand of the Whole Earth Catalog. Its whole purpose is to get people out of the busy day-to-day thinking of trying to meet profit margins for the next quarter to understanding ourselves as part of a longer sweep, a scope of the present moment that spans at least 200 years. One of their key projects actually is the clock that they're building out in a mountainside in Texas that's going to be a 10,000-year clock. They want a clock that will last for 10,000 years. All the design orientation for the clock, how it's housed and how it's powered, is all orchestrated around it lasting, keeping time predictably for 10,000 years. When we are trying to include this bigger sense, this part of being part of something in much greater scale, we are confronted again and again with the reality of the troubles of now, of the bee sting in the parking lot. I used to say, I have to make sure I keep space in my calendar in case someone dies. Something ministers need to do, make sure there's room to respond when a crisis happens. And this week I forgot. I packed my calendar. And when you look at your calendar for this next week, are there any days that don't have anything written on them? Let's see a show of hands. That's the wisest among you, or maybe the most retired? No, good, there are a few of us. I'm so glad. This is crazy. It's crazy that's unusual. We need space so that we can respond to things that are happening, things that are unexpected and surprising, so we can bring greater attention to that which is important but not urgent, as Stephen Covey would describe it. One of the things I wanted to give more attention to than I could this week were the events unfolding in Iran. The news stories that made me weep and celebrate. You likely know by now Zina Massa. Massa is the name that's been going around, Massa Amini, but Zina is her Kurdish name. She died on September 16th, was killed most likely by the morality police for improperly wearing her hijab, and her death has sparked a moment. Images of women standing on top of police cars or dumpsters, ripping off their hijabs and throwing them to the ground, throwing them into bonfires. The BBC journalist Rana Rampur shared about a conversation with her mom. She lives in London now and can't visit Iran, but her mom she talks to regularly every day, and her mom said, "I want to go. Can you tell me where they're getting together in Tehran? And I want to go because if someone's going to die, I don't want those young people who have a whole life to live. I don't think that they should be the ones getting killed. I've lived. I want to be there." Her daughter's thousands of miles away, fearing for her and tear gas, but also inspired by her daring greatly. Looking at those images, one of the phrases that came to me, and it's because it had its moment emblazoned on T-shirts all across our culture, the phrase coming to my mind was, "The future is female." It was a phrase that many associated with Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, but which actually had its roots before that election cycle and well before it was re-emblazoned on T-shirts in 2015. It was coined in the early 70s by a group of women who were associated with a bookstore in New York City, the first women's bookstore in New York City, Labyrinth. And they had a little Greenwich Village storefront opened in 1972. And out of that group of radical thinkers, radical women. One photographer, Liza Cohen, she took a picture of her girlfriend at the time, who was a singer-songwriter, and she was wearing that shirt, "The future is female." And it was that photograph that recaptured the imagination of American women 50 years later to emblazon that t-shirt, emblazon those words on t-shirts all over. The future is female. The future is queer. The future is black and brown. We know the statistics of ethnic change in our country. The future is female, the future is queer, the future is black and brown, for they shall inherit the earth. So I'm trying to hold together the vulnerability of touching into the risk that these women in Iran are taking by simply wearing their hair loose, with the hopeful future, the hopeful possibility of a future that looks so much greater and more expanded for all people than the present we have today. And as I try and hold those together, I'm not sure why exactly, but the story that came to my mind was a moment of deep depression in my own life when I dropped a jar of tomato sauce out of the fridge, and it, of course, shattered on the kitchen floor, and glass and tomato sauce went everywhere, and I just sat down and wept. I couldn't do anything else but sit and weep over tomato sauce and broken glass. And so this idea of vulnerability, what is vulnerability? Is it this fact of our lives that we too can shatter like a jar of tomato sauce, that we are fragile and breakable and will in the end perish? I used to think about vulnerability mostly that way, and then I would think about vulnerability as something to do. To be vulnerable as a way of changing opinions or changing the mood of a conversation. Vulnerability as a technique. When I was studying with the poet David Whyte, he had an invitation to cultivate a robust vulnerability, he said, which I just love the idea of there being such a thing as a robust vulnerability. But then he made a further noticing. He said his vulnerability is a faculty. It's a capacity for understanding what is about to happen. I'm still trying to figure out what the heck that means. But here's the way I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about the way our feelings and our nervous system, our less than conscious mind responds way quicker than our conscious mind to what's happening around us. They're more sensitive instruments. And this sensitivity, this is what I think we sometimes call our intuition, this capacity for knowing what's about to happen, this faculty of vulnerability. And I think this is what people talk about when they talk about prophets. People sometimes ask me about this, how do we wrap our heads around this idea of prophets from Scripture, these people who were coming to tell the future? Is that what prophecy is? And in our tradition, we don't think about prophets as people who tell the future, but rather people who hold a mirror up to society as it is. and see themselves vulnerably in that picture in order to imagine something else that could be. This is the prophetic imagination. And so it's not just a normal mirror, it is one of those convex mirrors. The convex mirror in which when you look at it, it doesn't show you a reflection of your image back. It shows you the image on the other side of the mirror. But at the same time that it's doing that, it's projecting you, your vulnerability, your little tin can on the road. It's projecting it onto the other side of that same mirror. So you can't see yourself, but instead you allow yourself to be made visible as you look at what's coming down the road. And I think in order to do this, we have to engage in the practice that Lynn was talking about of forgiveness, of letting go. To take the vulnerable stance of forgiveness rather than the prophet's call. The prophet's call to repentance. It's not a call to hunch under the weight of shame or to get back in line under the watchful eye of morality police. It's to take that vulnerable stance of forgiveness so that something new, something surprising, something life-giving might occur, might come around that curve. Forgiveness, the adage says, it's attributed to lots of folks, but Lily Tomlin's one of them, and she's so great, we'll give it to her. Forgiveness means giving up all hope of a better past. But I really don't think forgiveness is so much about the past as it is about the present. When we're still hooked in something that's happened in the past, it is in the present moment that hook, that reaction, that memory is happening physiologically in our bodies. Forgiveness is taking the stance that I'd rather heal in response to the way that event in the past is still affecting me. I'd rather heal than seek vengeance. I'd rather heal and set new boundaries and ask new questions and discover new insights than stay stuck in the loop of who is to blame and how should they be punished. Without the daring and vulnerable move toward forgiveness, the patterns just tend to keep repeating themselves. Cycles kept spinning with the momentum from whatever got them going. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. And so it's the stance of forgiveness, the vulnerability of forgiveness, that opens the horizons to new possibilities. If forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past, then forgiveness means instead placing that hope in a better future. And Rich Cohen was saying at a board meeting recently what it does for a group to have that shared sense of hope in a better future, that things are going to be better in the future than they have been in the past. When we feel that together as a group, when we have a shared vision that we are committed to, that we are driven to work toward, it energizes and excites and enlivens us all. My peak experience of that, I've shared with some of you this, working at a place called the Mosaic Project. We would bring together 4th and 5th grade classes to do peace and diversity and peace work, peace and diversity and human relations, conflict management. We would get together for a week of outdoor school, kids from very different schools getting mixed up in cabins together. And the staff of diverse backgrounds, people coming from all over the world to work together, would work 18-hour days to make this outdoor school happen. And we loved it. It was exhilarating and exciting. And at the end of the season, yes, we'd be exhausted, but we would be grieving leaving this little slice of the better world that we knew was possible, this microcosm of the world that we wished to see. And we used to grieve and say, oh, it's back to the real world now. But we realized it was starting to diminish the reality of what we had created together, to call the real world that thing that we were going back to. In fact, we realized, no, this was the real world. This world that existed for these 6 weeks, this season of outdoor school. What we're going back to is the pre-Mosaic world. The theological word for all of this is eschatology. It's the idea about what happens in the end. And there's lots of different eschatologies that have evolved. One of the ones that was popular for Unitarian Universalists for many years was what was called the social gospel eschatology. It's the eschatology that says it's our work to make the kingdom of God here on earth. It's our work to make things as they should be in the future. The limitation of that way of thinking, we've realized, though, is that the hoped-for future can condemn the reality of the present, can tell us we're always not quite there, and therefore we always need to be filling our calendars more and more packed full to do more and more to get to that eventual someday kingdom. Rebecca Parker, our elder theologian of the movement, talks about instead a radically realized eschatology, which is just to say it is here and now. The beauty and the struggle, they're all part of it. There is no better to get to. And our work to hope to build a better world, it's not work that comes out of our need to change the world as it is to get to some more perfect world down the line, but instead it comes from our love for the world as it is, our love for the beauty of the world as we've experienced it, our broken hearts, our vulnerability. Cohen, that photographer who took the picture of the future is female shirt, she said, if we're to have a future, it must be female. Because the rule of men, patriarchy, has just about devastated life on this beautiful little planet. The essence and the spirit of the future must be female. So the phrase is not just a slogan, but a spell for the good of all. So may the protests in Iran this week be such a spell. May the bravery of the women dancing on top of police cars, throwing headscarves into bonfires, kindle bravery in all of us to stand against illegitimate authority. As the women of Iran rise against an oppressive theocracy, may we see ourselves in solidarity as we resist the forces that would impose a narrow theology of life onto the bodies of all women in our society. So may we cast a spell here and now. Wonder for you, when I ask the future is, what word, what dream, what hope comes to your mind? I invite you to find that vulnerable intuition, that place of forgiveness and hope and prophecy, and call out the wisdom that you know, you prophets, one and all. Or put it in the chat on Zoom. So everybody call it out in a word or a phrase. The future is.
Forgiveness.
Brilliant. Inspiring.
Giving back.
Humanity. Lord, beauty. Lord, appreciation.
kindness. Down.
Maybe so. And amen.